Economic manipulations. What do you consider to be economic manipulations?
So we have two of those things, I think, on the list, right?
Intellectual property?
Yeah, and currency wars.
Currency wars.
I want to start with currency wars.
Okay.
People don't, I think some people get this, but most people don't worry about this. I worry about it night and day. It turns out that every nation today is debasing its currency. Everyone's in a big poker game. They're in a big challenge in a trading war worldwide where the great gains don't come from working harder or working smarter. The great gains come from making your currency a bit cheaper than the other guy's currency. And Japan began this as a national business model back in the post-war era. And they began intervening constantly with the yen-dollar rate to get an edge. And so their exporters could export more. Fair enough, we kind of ignored them. South Korea shows up with the same model a few years later, same thing, and literally takes from Japan what Japan had taken out of the United States. Then, many years later, China moves from being a Maoist or a communist nation in terms of its economic model, and suddenly it's doing the same thing. I call it mercantilism or info-mercantilism. Well, now we have 1.3, we have the biggest country in the world doing the same thing. Big problem. And when they manipulate their currency, they don't do it the way Japan does, like once every 3 months, every 6 months. They do it daily. There's never been a country in the past that I know of that has spent more time and energy manipulating their currency to make sure that they get the deal right, and you don't. People estimate 25 to 40% off on all goods and services coming out of China at the get-go just because of this. So if you make, plastic rabbits in America and they make plastic rabbits in China, you're going to lose because their pricing starts at 40% off simply by manipulating the currency. Well, that's so dramatically important that no trading partner in the world has been able to escape it. And today, every country is doing something like this in one way or another to degrade their currency. It's called competitive devaluation, technically. But it's a mess. And I really worry about this. I think it's a bad idea. It's something, it's like who's going to pay the piper? Eventually, you can't keep doing it. At some point, it becomes a house of cards and they all fall down. And the problem is, how do you find a happy face on this? And I think we actually have one here. The U.S. Federal Reserve, as you probably all know, has been doing what they call quantitative easing. They've been buying our debt up for years, gigantic amounts of debt, in order to try to keep the economy going faster. Well, they've stopped. We're about done with that. They've announced, it's like you were in a poker game and they said, okay, we're out. From now on, we're going to play fair and square. Well, that's exciting. It's challenging. It's dangerous. We'll see. Does anybody else around the table want to do the same thing? Will they all get their hands above the table now and play fair and square? Or are they all going to still be down here somewhere? So I don't know. I don't think there's a chance that China's going to stop, or that South Korea is going to stop, or that Japan is going to stop, because their national business models are based on this. But maybe other nations, maybe UK, maybe Australia, maybe Germany, maybe the EU, will stop. And that would be good, because if we don't all stop, very bad things happen. So I think the good news is we found the solution through the United States. And if other groups emulate us, they will say, yes, let's take our feet off the gas on this one and go back to normal trading and stop cheating. That's currency wars, and that's a scary thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to have questions and answer. We're going through these things like, afterwards we'll have Q&A. This one, global liquidity explosion, we renamed.
Well, we didn't do Invent IP yet,
We
right?
didn't do Invent IP. Got to do Invent IP.
I'm just trying to keep you honest.
I'm watching.
Okay, you and me were together.
Yeah, team.
So the other thing in this manipulations thing is even worse, which is, imagine a model, which I've just described in terms of fixing currency rates, but imagine that model requires requires you to steal. Okay, so part of the model is, you invent airplane parts, or you invent TVs, or you invent ships, or weapons, or whatever, and I'll just steal it. It's so much cheaper to steal it than it is to have to go through all that hard work. And so I'll just steal it, thank you very much, and then I'll put it into my economy, I'll subsidize it, I'll put it back out, we've already got a 40% deal right on our currency, and I'll subsidize it again, we'll sell it for half price in Houston, you go out of business. How do you like that? And that's what's happening right now. So I'll give you one example. In the telecom equipment sector, which if you're a tech person, and there are a few here I know, That's the most strategic ground in the world. Telecom equipment is the internet. It's what connects all the internet stuff together. That sector is essentially now gone. China owns 60% of that sector, with a company that didn't exist 25 years ago. So they sell at half price. They'll put a team of 150 people for free in your country for a whole year to work for nothing just to get the deal. No one can compete with this. And the result is complete destruction of that sector. So this is a worry. It was okay when Japan did it because they only did it with 5 industries. But they did rip those 5 industries right out of the US where we invented them. They include televisions, important industries, video. So it's tough, but we took it. South Korea, as I said, did that to Japan. Okay, fine, we watched and probably laughed. But China has named 402 different sectors now where they want to do this. Well, that's everything. I don't think there's anything left. I think 402 sectors is essentially the global economy. And if that's true, this is deeply troubling because we can't really sustain having the theft occur at these levels in every part of the economy. So that's a deep worry. And the solution, I wish I could give you a really easy solution. The only solution I know of is simple but hard. And that is, instead of going for the quick buck, which our companies tend to do, we have to be long-term planners just like everybody else in this game. And America and UK and Australia and the EU need to all stand up together, and all the companies in those countries need to stand up and take a short-term loss and say, you know what? We're sacrificing short-term gains instead of long-term loss. We're going to stand up and say no more. If you try to sell something with stolen IP of ours back to us into our country, we're not going to buy it. Every time you try to sell a router or a TV or a car or an airplane or a bomb, whatever it's going to be, weaponry, we won't buy it. None of us will buy it. None of the inventing nations will buy it. If we did that, the practice would stop on a dime. So there's a clear solution for this. And all it takes, at a time when we can't have our own government even talk to each other, all it takes is having all those nations work together and do this at once. But if we did get them to do that, it would work. So we spend a little overtime on that problem, and we haven't solved it yet. But that's what we're trying to get done.
Thanks for coming and speaking tonight. I think you raised some very interesting points. But I think there's an underlying theme that you didn't address, and that's global leverage. Personal leverage, government leverage, and how that really is driving a lot of the decisions being made. You know, you're right about China and the Chinese, because they've been able to, you know, basically sell everything at 40% off, have amassed this global war chest of reserves. Russia, you know, when oil prices were a lot higher, you know, has amassed this global war chest of reserves. Argentina, on the other hand, doesn't really have a global war chest of reserves.
Neither does Venezuela.
No, right, exactly. So, I mean, there are winners and losers in this global economic scene. But clearly, it's you know, you talk about a consortium of the US, the EU, the Australians, you know, basically coming together and saying, we have to stop this in the track. Well, it all seems well and good unless the Chinese, and you rely on the Chinese to buy a lot of our debt. And, you know, and that's, I think, our biggest problem.
I'm glad you brought that up. So there are a number of memes that are out and about that have to do with why we shouldn't or can't deal with China. And that's one, that they own too much of our debt. I've done the math on this, and I see it at 6%. You always hear it in terms of dollars. You go, oh my God, that's a lot of dollars. But it's actually 6% of our debt. I think it would be a headache. We'd have 2 bad quarters, and then we'd wake up. So it's bad.
Who else owns the other 94% right now?
I don't know. Okay. A lot of folks, including the Federal Reserve, owns a lot of debt now.
Right.
But
it's been printing money to finance that.
Yeah.
Debt.
So if you knew it was just 6%, you might go, well, okay, let's look at this. I literally went through this once. I can't describe the meeting. It was a security thing. But one of the world's most famous economists, and he didn't know this. And there was another guy sitting next to me who was also very famous, and he did know. And we were sitting like, why doesn't Martin know this? That's all I'll say about that. But you might know who Martin is, you know. So it's a solvable problem. And when you ask, well, if we said, guess what, we're your biggest customer, which is true, and we decided to stop trading with you, who's going to get hurt more, us or them? I'll tell you who, them. We're going to be fine, but they're not going to be fine. That's like the end of China. And they're smart guys. They know that. The thing that mystifies me is, why don't we know that? I don't understand that.
Max.
So how can we protect intellectual property without stifling innovation? How can we promote the free flow of information?
Oh, yeah. Good question, Max. So when I've been traveling around trying to figure out the answer to this, there are different places I go, right? So I went to the NSA. I spent a whole day briefing the NSA on the source of the problem because they thought it was a security problem. And I understand it as an economic problem, as a business model problem. At root, the answer is protection isn't going to work very well. It's because there's always another radar trap. It's like cops and robbers. There's always going to be the next thing where you steal it better because your defenses were down. It's got to be something where when a country tries to steal IP, the penalties are so high that it's not worth it. We don't fire off nuclear weapons because the penalties are so high, nobody wants to do it. That's how it's got to be. It's got to be where, oh, you tried to destroy my entire national economy by taking all our crown jewels. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to trade with you anymore. You just go suck wind and see if your economy dies on the vine. That would be pretty serious. That's a true trade war. But it would save the planet's economy. So it's not a bad idea. Just the threat of it, you don't have to do it, but the threat of it, if it were tangible, if it were credible, might be enough. When I go to universities, when I go to companies, they get it, right? So a company, Boeing, they've got crown jewels. They do not want these things to show up somewhere else. They spent $1 billion to make Microsoft's next operating system. They hate seeing it on sale for 50 cents, next day. But even harder is when you go, or much harder, is when you go to universities, because guess what? Their job is the free dissemination and the creation of intellectual property. It's against every part of their whole idea of being a university that they would try to protect IP. Guess where the Chinese are going right now? Universities. And it's been going on for quite a while. So we had a guy with us in New York last year at our New York dinner who was the head of, in James Bond's world, he would have been called C, right? He was the head of MI6. And his name is Sir Richard Dearlove. And he described in Britain going to Cambridge, which is his old alma mater, when he was C. And he said, look, here's what's happening. The Chinese have sent in an espionage team. Here's their names. Here's who they are. They say they're students, but they're not students. Some are enrolled as students, some are not. Here's the handler. He's not a student either. And they're telling, like they want to go after, be friends with this prof, go after this IP, go get this stuff, and then send it home. They wouldn't even talk to him. They couldn't have a conversation. They were offended that he brought this up. So, big problem. And I've been working on this problem with UC San Diego a little bit and some other schools. And here's what happens. In school, you have this moment where you invent a new chip, or something, right? And the school usually declares that intellectual property. It's like, yesterday it was a study project. You did such a great job, Max, that we're now going to declare that a PRP chip, and it has value to the University of Utah or wherever you are. And now, new rules apply. First of all, you get certain rights. It's your chip. But we get some because it's our chip too, because it's where university you're here. So we're going to share these rights. And we're going to agree to behave differently than yesterday. You are not now going to put this on the internet. You are not now going to, without us agreeing somehow. So there's a change in behavior based on the declaration of that IP as having moved from a great idea in an open school system to a potentially commercially valuable item. And I think if universities got that figured out correctly, it would solve a lot of trouble, a lot of problems. That's the best answer I can give you.